The sun rained mercilessly over the Arizona desert, casting long waves of heat across the cracked, sun-bleached earth. The sky was a perfect dome of blue, unbroken by clouds, unyielding in its intensity. The only sound was the crunch of sand and gravel beneath the worn boots of a man whose steps faltered more with each mile. Michael Carter had stopped sweating hours ago. His skin, once tanned from years in the military, was now the color of scorched clay, and his lips had split from the dry air. A tattered backpack hung loosely off one shoulder, swaying slightly with his uneven pace. He muttered to himself as he walked, bits of scripture jumbled with curses, fragments of memory bleeding into delirium. In the valley of the shadow, though I walk, I shall fear. He stopped, squinting against the white glare. What the hell was the next line? There was no answer. The desert gave none. Just silence and heat. He glanced at the horizon, nothing but shimmering mirages. His throat burned like broken glass, his stomach hollow. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. Water? Maybe a sip left. But he was saving that, for when he truly needed it. But when would that be? He didn't know. All he knew was that he had to keep walking. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this one. The wind shifted slightly, carrying grains of sand that stung his face. He raised a hand slowly, trying to shield his eyes, but his arm trembled with the effort. He was used to pain. Years in the Marines had carved pain into him like initials into stone. But this was something else. He walked not towards something, but away, from guilt, from failure, from a past he could no longer bear. Phoenix was behind him, somewhere beyond the distant hills. He hadn't looked back, he wouldn't. The sun climbed higher, showing no mercy. His boots had worn thin. Each step sent tiny shocks of agony up through his legs. A blister burst on his heel and he hissed through clenched teeth, but didn't stop. Stopping would mean thinking, and thinking was dangerous. "Lord," he rasped, "just give me a damn sign." But again, nothing. Only the wind, and the endless punishing light. Michael stumbled. His knee struck a rock, tearing through the thin denim of his jeans. Blood seeped into the fabric, but he barely noticed. He fell forward onto his hands, the sand burning his palms. Grit filled his mouth. He spat and tried to push himself up, but his arms quivered, weak. He stayed on all fours, breathing shallow, tasting copper and dirt. He laughed once, bitterly. "This how it ends, huh?" Alone in the middle of nowhere, babbling to nobody. Then something shifted, not in the air but in him. A memory flickered, his mother's voice, soft, southern, warm like fresh bread on Sunday. God don't forget his children, Mikey, even in the wilderness. He squeezed his eyes shut. No, he wouldn't remember her now, not here, not while dying. He forced himself to stand. The world tilted. He steadied himself. Step. Another. The silence pressed harder, but something inside him had stirred. Just barely. Far off, a shadow passed across the rocks. His eyes followed it. But it was gone. A trick of the sun. A hallucination. Still, he walked. The wind whispered again. It almost sounded like his name. He shook his head. "You're losing it, Mike." He walked on. And behind him, his footprints slowly disappeared beneath the shifting sands. Long before Michael Carter found himself dragging his soul across the desert, he'd been the kind of man others leaned on. Strong, composed, reliable. A Marine through and through. He enlisted out of high school in Houston, Texas, eager to escape his alcoholic father and the silence of a home that had forgotten how to love. The Corps gave him purpose. For 12 years he served in places he still couldn't fully describe. Kandahar, Helmand, back to Kabul. Dust and blood, sweat and fear. His body had been tested, but it was his mind that bore the heaviest weight. He came home different. Not broken, but bent in places only he could feel. The noise of traffic made him flinch. Fireworks turned his stomach. Sleep was a stranger. He tried therapy once, tried to talk about it, but the words felt like betrayal to the brothers who never came back. Still, he pressed on. He found a job as a security supervisor in Dallas, kept things tight and clean, even met someone, Lena. She was patient, kind. They married fast, too fast. At first things seemed normal. They even laughed, talked about having kids. But the nights grew longer. He'd wake drenched in sweat, fists clenched, heart racing like war drums. Some mornings he'd stare into the mirror and not recognize the man staring back. Lena tried. She begged him to open up. But how do you explain what it feels like to hold a dying boy in your arms? Or the silence that comes after an explosion when your ears ring and your world ends? The drinking started slowly. A beer to calm his nerves, then whiskey, then vodka, then whatever was left. He lost the job after he blacked out during a night shift. Management said they had no choice. He didn't argue, just packed his things and left. That same week he came home to find Lena gone. A note on the kitchen table scrawled in her familiar handwriting, "You need help, Mike. I can't watch you drown." The house felt emptier than a bunker at dawn. He wandered from room to room, still expecting her laugh, her voice, but she never came back. Months passed, bills piled up. He sold the TV, then the truck, then the wedding ring. When his younger brother, Tyler, called him one night asking for help, Michael was too drunk to answer. Tyler was gone by morning, overdose, heroin. Michael never forgave himself. He stared at the casket without crying. Couldn't. His parents blamed him. Maybe they were right. Something inside him collapsed that day, like a building losing its foundation. He packed a bag, grabbed a worn Bible from his childhood drawer and walked out the door. No destination, no plan, just movement. Westward. He figured the desert might be big enough to swallow what was left of him. 1 week later, he found himself wandering the edge of Phoenix, asking for water at gas stations, sleeping behind dumpsters. No one really looked at him. He didn't blame them. The backpack grew lighter, his body shrank, his eyes dulled, but still he kept walking. Somewhere between the asphalt and the cactus fields, he stopped trying to understand the world. He stopped hoping, stopped praying. He told himself it was about punishment, redemption. But maybe it was just escape. Now, days into the blistering Mojave, the memories gnawed at him like wolves. They came in flashes. Lena's soft voice, Tyler's laugh, the feel of sand under his boots in foreign lands. Each step burned, each breath hurt. But the silence of the desert was better than the noise inside his head, and so he walked. Toward what, he didn't know, but part of him feared that if he stopped, the past would catch up. And he wasn't sure he could survive that. The sun had just begun to dip low, casting a dull orange hue over the desert plains, when Michael stumbled into the outskirts of Quartzsite, Arizona. A cluster of RVs, gas stations, and roadside diners. Barely a town, really, more like a way station between nowhere and nowhere else. He looked like a ghost. Dust-covered jeans clinging to his legs, shirt darkened with sweat, face burned red by the relentless sun. His breath came in ragged pulls, and every muscle in his body ached with fatigue. Yet he kept moving, pulled by something he couldn't name. He saw a rickety wooden bench outside a small general store. It looked like salvation. He collapsed onto it, slumping forward, eyes shut. For a moment he just sat, letting the sweat dry on his skin, letting his limbs go limp. You look like a man who's either found hell or is still walking through it. The voice came from beside him, slow, gravelly, like desert wind moving over rocks. Michael opened his eyes to find an older man sitting 2 feet away, leaning on a cane. He wore a battered cowboy hat, flannel shirt rolled to the elbows, and boots cracked with age. Michael blinked. "You always sneak up on dying men?" The old man chuckled. "You ain't dead. Not yet, anyway." "I might be. Just too stubborn to lay down." "That's so." The man looked him over, eyes sharp beneath the brim. "Name's Elijah." Michael hesitated. Then grudgingly, "Michael." "Well, Michael, reckon you need water more than talk." Before Michael could answer, Elijah reached into a cooler by his feet and handed over a bottle. The plastic was sun-warped, but the water inside was blessedly cold. Michael drank greedily, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Appreciate it," he muttered. Elijah nodded. "Where you headed?" Michael stared down the road. "Nowhere, just away." "That's a mighty long walk, son." Michael didn't respond. Elijah leaned back, tapping his cane. "You a military man?" Michael's jaw tightened. "Used to be." "I can tell. Shoulders like yours don't come from plumbing." A silence stretched between them. The evening wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of fried grease and creosote bush. "You know," Elijah said after a while, "this desert's got a way of stripping everything down to the bones. People come here lost, thinking maybe the emptiness'll swallow up the pain." Michael looked at him, the bottle halfway to his lips. "But it don't work like that," Elijah continued. "Desert don't erase nothing, it reveals." "You some kind of preacher?" Michael asked dryly. "Nope, just a man who's buried enough ghosts to recognize another walking." Michael shifted. The words hit a little too close. "You got somewhere to be tonight?" Elijah asked. "No. You could rest here, ain't much, but I got a cot in the back of my trailer. Clean enough. Safe." Michael looked away. "I don't deserve comfort." "You don't strike me as the judge of what you deserve." Michael stood, suddenly agitated. "Thanks for the water." Elijah didn't try to stop him. "Suit yourself. But if you're out here looking for punishment, just remember, sometimes it finds you." Michael started walking, each step heavier than the last. "Elijah," he called over his shoulder. "What do you think's at the end of all this?" Elijah smiled faintly. "Redemption, if you're lucky. Ruin, if you're not. But either way, you'll find out who you really are." Michael didn't respond. The sun slipped below the horizon behind him, and shadows grew long across the sand. He didn't know why, but Elijah's words followed him into the dark. Michael walked until Quartzsite disappeared behind him, swallowed by the dusk and the curve of the earth. The road turned to dust again, and the silence returned like a blanket over the world. It was cooler now, but the heat had done its damage. His skin felt raw, like it might peel off with a touch. Every breath came shallow, dry. He hadn't seen another person in hours. The stars hadn't come out yet. The sky remained a strange, molten gold, stretched thin across the horizon like it refused to give way to night. It unsettled him. Time felt off, like the day was stuck, clinging to its last light. Michael's legs trembled beneath him. His back ached from the weight of the pack, though there wasn't much left inside. Half a protein bar, the Bible he hadn't touched in days, and the last half sip of water. He sat on a rock, boots sinking into the warm sand beneath him, sweat traced lines down his neck. His mind wandered again. His mom humming hymns while folding laundry, the smell of cinnamon in their kitchen. Him at 8, standing nervously in a too-tight shirt for his first communion, clutching her hand. That version of him felt like another person, someone who still believed in goodness. He shook his head and leaned forward, resting elbows on knees. His hands trembled. "I don't know what I'm doing," he whispered to no one. "I thought maybe I'd figure it out here. But there's nothing here." The wind didn't answer. Another image struck him. Lena standing at the door, her voice breaking. "You used to fight for something, Mike. Now you're just running." He covered his face with his hands. He hadn't cried in years, and this wasn't crying, not really. Just a deep ache pressing against his ribs like a weight he couldn't lift. Above, the sky remained gold. Not orange, not fading, just gold like a burning halo. He stared at it. "Why won't it end?" he murmured. "Why won't the sun just set?" Then, somewhere in the periphery of his vision, the horizon rippled. Not a heat mirage, something different. The air shimmered and he thought he saw a shape, human maybe, walking far off among the rocks. He blinked. Gone. "Just the heat," he told himself. "Just your brain cooking in your skull." Still, the feeling didn't leave. Like he was being watched, not with malice, just seen. He stood again, unsteady, his knees cracking from the effort. A strange stillness had fallen. The wind had died. No insects chirped. No distant coyotes howled. The desert held its breath. Michael turned in a slow circle, eyes scanning the ridges, the brush, the dry crevices. Nothing moved, yet his heart pounded like someone had whispered his name. "Come on," he muttered. "Snap out of it." But he didn't walk, not yet. He waited. For what? He didn't know. Then the ground beneath his feet pulsed. Just once. Subtle. Like the earth had a heartbeat. He staggered back, nearly fell. Another flash, a memory, Afghanistan. The moment before a roadside bomb went off. That same eerie quiet. He clutched his chest. No, not now, not here. But there was no explosion. Just silence. And that golden sky. It clung to the world like it wasn't done telling its story. Michael took a breath, slow and shaky. A whisper floated across the back of his mind. Not words, not sound, just a presence. Familiar, heavy. He turned north. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he started walking again. Not to escape, not to run, but to follow. The gold sky faded at last into a murky violet, and night settled like ash across the desert. Michael kept walking, though his body begged him to stop. His feet dragged through loose sand. Each step felt like lifting concrete. He was running on fumes, less than that. Pure will. The desert no longer looked real. The shapes of rocks and shrubs twisted in his vision, bending like heat waves. His thoughts slipped out of order. Sometimes he muttered to himself, other times he didn't recognize his own voice. Then he saw the snakes, 3 of them gliding across the sand in perfect silence, maybe 20 feet ahead. Their scales shimmered under the moonlight, not brown or black, but glistening silver, almost metallic. They moved like liquid, weaving intricate patterns in the dust. He froze. They didn't notice him, or didn't care. He waited for the strike, the warning hiss, the coiled tension, but they passed him by, their tongues flicking as they slid away into the shadows. He exhaled slowly. "Keep walking," he told himself. "Don't think, don't stop." But his legs buckled. He dropped to his knees, then to his hands, the grit grinding into his skin. The ground felt warm, too warm, like it was pulsing beneath him, breathing. He pressed his palm flat against the earth. Thump. A faint rhythm. He jerked his hand back. He was hallucinating. Had to be. But the rhythm continued, not from the ground now, but from within. His chest. His ribs trembled as the beat grew louder, deeper, like a drum calling from inside his bones. He gasped for air. It wouldn't come. Then came the whisper. Not out loud, not in his ears, but in his mind. "You're not alone." He spun around, searching, panting. Nothing, just blackness and stars. But he'd heard it, or felt it. It wasn't his own voice. It was something else, something outside. He crawled toward a boulder and slumped against it, arms limp. The cold rock pressed against his spine. He felt dizzy, lightheaded, floating. "Please," he whispered. "I don't know what to do anymore." Another voice, softer. "You never did, that's why you're here." He didn't argue. He didn't even wonder if he was dying. He was too tired to care. His eyes drifted shut. His fingers curled against his chest. A strange warmth spread from his core outward, not painful, not frightening, almost peaceful. Memories flooded in, Tyler laughing as they raced bikes down a gravel hill, Lena singing along to the radio in the car, his mother kneeling beside him in church, eyes closed, lips moving in prayer. All of it layered with something else, something deeper, not the pain, not the guilt, but the love. He hadn't thought about love in years. Real love. The kind that doesn't walk away. The kind that doesn't demand you be whole to be worthy. His body slackened. The stars above seemed to draw closer, brighter. And in the edge of sleep he heard footsteps. Soft ones, crunching sand, near. He tried to lift his head to call out, but his tongue felt heavy, useless. He listened. Whoever it was stopped just in front of him. Then silence, but not emptiness. Presence. That's the only word he could think of. A presence. Heavy, gentle, watching. He exhaled a long breath and everything faded. Michael Carter, broken soldier, fell asleep in the desert, surrounded by mystery, haunted by voices, and somehow impossibly beginning to feel less alone. Michael didn't know if he was dreaming or dead. The air around him shimmered like the surface of a lake under moonlight, and he was no longer lying in the sand. He stood, somehow upright, barefoot, yet steady, inside what looked like the hollow shell of an old chapel. The walls were crumbling adobe, dust coating everything. The pews were broken, splinters jutting out like bones. But at the far end, flickering candles lined the base of a wooden altar, their flames dancing even though there was no wind. And sitting on the steps was a man. Michael couldn't see his face, just the outline of him cloaked in a white robe, head slightly bowed, hands resting calmly on his knees. The man wasn't glowing, he wasn't floating, he was simply present. Michael stepped forward, hesitant. His bare feet made no sound on the dirt floor. "Is this a dream?" he asked, his voice dry and thin. The man didn't move. Michael took another step. "If this is some kind of twisted memory, I don't want it." Still silence. He clenched his fists. "You know what I've done? Who I am?" The man slowly turned his head, not fully, just enough that Michael could sense his attention. "I killed people," Michael said, the words rushing out now. "I ignored my brother's call. I let the woman who loved me walk out without stopping her. I drank until my mind went black. I wanted to die in that desert. I still do." The man rose slowly, walking toward him, not with force but with calm, measured steps. His face was still hidden, bathed in shadow, but his presence filled the room like light. Michael's knees shook. "I'm nothing," he whispered. "You hear me? Nothing." The man stopped a few feet in front of him. His voice, when it came, was not booming. It was gentle, deep, steady. "You were never nothing, Michael." Michael's lips trembled. "I watched you in the sand," the man said, "when you fell, when you wept, when you thought no one saw. I was there." Michael shook his head. "I didn't see anyone." "You weren't supposed to. You were supposed to walk through it." "Why?" "To remember what love feels like. Even broken." Michael looked down at his hands, dirt under the nails, scars on the knuckles. The man stepped closer. "You think you're alone because of what you did, but you're alone because you stopped believing I still wanted you." Michael's eyes filled with tears. "Do you?" The man didn't answer immediately. Didn't. He reached out and touched Michael's shoulder just lightly, and in that moment, Michael felt the weight of everything inside him break. All the guilt, all the hate, all the self-loathing he'd carried for years. The man whispered, "You never stopped being mine." Michael collapsed to his knees, sobbing without shame. "I don't know how to come back," he said. "I don't even know who I am anymore." "You don't need to know, just follow." Michael lifted his head. "Follow what?" The man took a step back. "The quiet voice, the one that brought you here." The candles flickered brighter, and the walls of the chapel seemed to breathe. Michael reached out, desperate to hold on to the moment, but the air shifted again. The man turned, walking back toward the altar. "Wait," Michael called out. "Please don't go." But the vision began to blur. The chapel faded. The scent of wax and dust dissolved into dry air and wind. Darkness crept back in. His body felt heavy again, grounded, but something had changed. Even as the dream slipped away, the voice lingered. "You were never nothing." And with that, the silence returned, but it no longer felt empty. Michael woke to the crackling sound of fire and the smell of something warm in the air. His eyes opened slowly, crusted with sand, lashes stiff. He expected darkness, cold, loneliness, but there was light, not sunlight, firelight. A small campfire burned steadily a few feet away, its orange glow pushing back the shadows. His body ached in every joint, but he felt alive. The pain was real again, sharp and present. He turned his head and saw her. A woman, maybe in her early 30s, sat cross-legged near the flames. Her hair was tied back, her jacket dusty. She looked up from stirring a battered tin pot and met his gaze. "You're awake," she said. Her voice was calm, but alert. "I was starting to worry." Michael blinked, unsure whether to speak. His throat felt raw. "Here," she said, grabbing a canteen and holding it out. Small sips. He took it with shaking hands. The water was lukewarm but clean, and it felt like heaven sliding down his throat. "Thanks," he rasped. She gave a small nod. "You were out cold for hours. Found you slumped against a rock. Looked like you hadn't eaten in days." "That's probably true." "You alone?" He hesitated. "Yeah. I'm Grace," she said, setting the pot aside. "I volunteer with a mobile aid group based out of Flagstaff. We drive down here a few times a month. Usually help migrants who get stranded, sometimes hikers or folks, well, like you." Michael sat up slowly, his body protesting with every motion. "Michael, you're lucky I spotted the smoke from my ATV. Most people wouldn't have." He looked around. The landscape was the same, arid, sparse, but less threatening now, more like a backdrop than a monster. "How long was I out?" "Couple hours at least. You were burning up. I gave you some rehydration salts and wrapped your hand. You had a nasty cut." He looked down. His right hand was bandaged with gauze. The pain was dull now. Grace watched him for a moment, then said, "You've been out here a while, haven't you?" He didn't answer. People don't walk this far without a reason. Still, silence. She didn't push, just poked at the fire with a stick. Eventually he said, "I didn't think anyone would find me. Maybe someone wanted you to be found." He glanced at her. "You mean God?" She shrugged. "I mean, sometimes people show up at exactly the right moment, and I don't think it's always coincidence." He looked back at the flames. "I don't know if I believe in that anymore." Grace smiled faintly. "Doesn't mean it stops being true." They sat in silence a while longer. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. "You said you help migrants?" "Yeah. Some don't make it. The desert's cruel, but I can't not try." Michael nodded slowly. "You military?" she asked. "Used to be." "I figured. You've got that look, shoulders back, like you're always ready for something to go wrong." He gave a small, tired laugh. "That obvious?" "Only to someone who's spent enough time in rescue camps." She handed him a bowl of soup, beans and rice maybe. He took it gratefully. "You should sleep," she said, rising. "You've still got a long way to go." "To where?" She tilted her head, considering. "Wherever you're supposed to be." Michael looked down at the bowl in his hands. The warmth spread through him, but it wasn't just the food. It was the feeling of being seen, cared for, human again. He didn't know it yet, but something inside him had begun to mend, and he wasn't sure he wanted to walk alone anymore. The night stretched long, and the desert cooled under the silver watch of the moon. Michael lay awake beside the fire, his body grateful for rest but his mind a battlefield. Sleep teased him, then fled, leaving him stranded in the churn of his thoughts. Grace sat across from him, knees drawn up, her hands wrapped around a mug. She had been quiet for most of the evening, giving him space, but eventually she asked, "You ever wonder why you're still here? Why you didn't just give up out there?" Michael let out a humorless laugh. "You think I didn't try? If it wasn't for you, I'd be dead already." Maybe that's how it should have been. Her gaze stayed steady. "Why would you say that?" He stared into the fire, eyes hard. "Because God didn't save my brother. Didn't stop him from putting a needle in his arm. Didn't stop the call I ignored. Didn't stop me from wasting everything good in my life." Grace's face softened. "I'm sorry about your brother." Michael shook his head, jaw clenched. "Don't be. I failed him, just like I failed Lena. Just like I failed myself. What kind of God lets a man live who doesn't deserve it?" The fire popped. Grace leaned forward slightly. "Maybe it's not about deserving. Maybe it's about surviving long enough to see why you're still here." He scoffed. "Sounds like something out of a church pamphlet." She didn't flinch. "It's something I've had to tell myself. My dad was a trucker, worked himself to the bone, drank hard. One night he didn't make it home. His rig flipped outside Albuquerque. I was 16. I thought God hated me. Thought he took the only parent I had left." Michael looked at her for the first time, surprised by the rawness in her tone. "So yeah," she continued, I stopped believing too. But then years later I met a woman who told me something I'll never forget. God didn't abandon you. You just stopped looking. Her words echoed in him like stones dropped into deep water. He turned away, swallowing hard. If that's true, then where was he when I was holding a kid in Afghanistan bleeding out in my arms? Where was he when I woke up night after night choking on my own screams? Where was he when Tyler called me begging for help and I ignored it? Grace didn't answer immediately. Her silence wasn't dismissive. It was patient, heavy, letting the weight of his words settle. Finally, she said, "Maybe he was there, in the moments you don't want to remember. Maybe he's here now in the fact that you're still breathing, still walking, even when you don't want to." Michael's throat tightened. "You think I'm worth saving?" "I don't have to think it," she said softly. "I know it, because I can see it. Even if you can't." He let the words sit inside him, unsure if he wanted them to take root. His heart ached with the effort of holding back the swell of emotions. The silence between them stretched again, but this time it wasn't empty. Michael leaned back, staring at the stars. They were sharp tonight, glittering like fragments of broken glass spread across the sky. He remembered lying in the dirt overseas, staring at a sky not so different, thinking he might not live to see another sunrise. For the first time in years, the memory didn't crush him. It lingered, heavy but survivable. Grace finished her mug and stood. "Get some sleep, Michael. Tomorrow will be hard." He nodded slowly. But as he lay back down, one thought whispered through him, unbidden and unwelcome. "Maybe I'm not meant to die here." The desert night was colder than Michael remembered. He lay wrapped in a thin blanket Grace had given him, staring up at the endless sweep of stars. Sleep wouldn't come. His mind spun in circles, dragging him through the same dark corridors he thought he'd left behind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Tyler, not as the kid who used to chase him down dirt roads on a rusty bike, but as the body in a coffin, pale, lifeless, silent. He sat up, his chest heaving, a thin fog of breath rising in the cold. Grace was asleep near the fire, her face soft in the glow. He didn't want to wake her, he didn't want to talk. So he stood. The sand crunched beneath his boots as he moved away from the fire, further into the silence. He didn't have a destination, just the gnawing urge to move, to run from the weight pressing in. But then he saw them, footprints, not his, not Grace's, too large, too deep, cutting a path into the dark beyond the firelight. He froze, staring at them. They looked fresh, like someone had just walked past minutes ago. His pulse kicked up. "Grace?" he whispered, though he knew she was behind him, asleep. The footprints led north, toward the rocky ridge. Against all reason, he followed. The night swallowed him. The moon painted everything silver, shadows stretching long across the sand. He kept his eyes on the trail of prints, his breath growing faster, heart pounding like a drum in his ears. After what felt like miles, the prints ended, just stopped in the middle of the sand. Michael looked around, confused. "Hello?" No answer. Only the whisper of the wind. Then he noticed it, a rock nearby. Its surface was smooth, but carved into it, rough, almost jagged, were words. "Keep going." "I'm with you." Michael's throat closed. He reached out with trembling fingers, tracing the letters. They were real, solid. Tears blurred his vision. He fell to his knees in front of the stone, his body racked with sobs he hadn't let himself feel in years. "Why me?" he cried into the night. "Why would anyone stay with me, after everything I've done?" The silence didn't answer. But it didn't feel empty anymore. For the first time since Tyler's death, Michael let the grief come. He pressed his forehead against the rock, shoulders shaking, the desert bearing witness. When the storm inside him finally eased, he sat back on his heels, chest raw, face wet. He whispered, "If you're real, if you're still here, then don't let me quit." The wind moved softly, brushing against his skin like a hand on his shoulder. And Michael, broken and exhausted, felt something shift, something small but undeniable, a thread of hope. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and stood slowly. His legs were unsteady, but his heart beat with a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. He turned back toward the fire in the distance, a faint glow against the darkness. Every step back felt lighter than the steps that had brought him here. For the first time in a long time, Michael Carter wasn't walking away from something. He was walking toward it. Morning broke with a harsh light that seemed to pierce straight through Michael's skull. He sat by the remains of the fire, rubbing his temples, while Grace packed their things into her rucksack. She glanced at him, her expression careful. "You didn't sleep," she said, more a statement than a question. Michael shook his head. "Not much. You look different. Like something shifted." He didn't answer. How could he explain the footprints, the stone, the words that carved themselves into his chest? He didn't know if it was madness or miracle, but he knew one thing. He couldn't keep drifting. "Where were you headed before you found me?" Grace asked. He hesitated. "Nowhere. Just walking." She studied him a moment, then said, "There's a ridge about 20 miles from here. Locals call it Redemption Ridge. Some go there to pray, some just to climb. They say it changes people." Michael smirked faintly. "That sounds like a tourist trap." "Maybe," she said, "or maybe it's exactly what you need." He stared at the horizon. The ridge rose faintly in the distance, jagged and red against the sky. 20 miles. His body protested at the thought. But something inside him, something raw and restless, leaned toward it. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll go." They started walking. The desert grew harsher with every mile. The sun climbed mercilessly, baking the ground until the air shimmered. Michael's boots rubbed raw against his blistered feet. His shirt clung to his back with sweat. Every step felt heavier than the last. Grace kept pace, her breath steady. She glanced at him occasionally, but didn't push him with words. Michael's mind churned as the hours dragged. He thought of his father, silent at the dinner table, eyes fixed on a bottle instead of his son's. He thought of Lena's tear-streaked face when she left. He thought of Tyler's call, the one he hadn't answered. The guilt pressed down harder than the sun. He stumbled once, catching himself on a rock. Grace grabbed his arm. "You okay?" "Fine," he grunted. But he wasn't fine. His legs shook. His vision blurred. They stopped to rest under the sparse shadow of a mesquite tree. Michael slumped against the trunk, gasping for air. "This is pointless," he muttered. "I'm not going to find anything up there. Just more rock, more silence." Grace crouched beside him. "Maybe. Or maybe you'll find yourself." He barked a bitter laugh. "I don't want myself. I've had enough of him." She looked at him with a steady gaze. "Then maybe you'll find someone else." The words unsettled him. He looked away. They moved on after a short rest. The climb grew steeper as they neared the ridge. Loose stones shifted beneath their boots, forcing them to slow. Michael's thighs burned with every step, sweat stinging his eyes. His hands scraped against sharp rock as he pulled himself upward. Halfway up, he collapsed to his knees, chest heaving. His arms trembled violently. I can't do this." Grace knelt beside him, gripping his shoulder. "Yes, you can." "No," he growled, voice breaking. "I'm done. I don't have anything left." She leaned closer, eyes fierce. "Then stop doing it alone." The words pierced him. He closed his eyes, swallowing hard. His body screamed to quit, to lie down, to let the desert take him. But somewhere deeper, past the exhaustion and despair, something whispered, "Don't stop. The light is near." He forced himself up, one shaky step at a time. The ridge loomed above them, daunting and unforgiving. And Michael knew whatever waited there would not be easy, but he kept climbing. The climb grew crueler with every step. Loose shale shifted beneath Michael's boots, and the incline forced his muscles to burn like fire. The sun hammered down, and sweat blurred his vision. Grace moved ahead with steady determination, glancing back now and then, but giving him space to fight his own battle. By midday, the horizon blurred into a white haze. Heat shimmered off the rocks, bending the air into distorted shapes. Michael wiped his face with a trembling hand. His throat was dry as ash, his tongue swollen. Then the sky changed. It started as a low moan in the distance. The air cooled suddenly, unnaturally. A wall of dust rose on the horizon, billowing upward like a living beast. Grace froze. Dust storm. Michael's chest tightened. What do we do? Cover your face. Keep moving. Don't lose me. The storm hit with a roar, sand whipping against their skin like shards of glass. The world vanished in a brown swirl of chaos. Michael reached blindly, groping for Grace's arm, but the wind tore them apart. He shouted her name, but the storm swallowed his voice. He stumbled forward, coughing, eyes stinging. Every direction looked the same, nothing but choking dust. He dropped to his knees, pulling his shirt over his mouth, but it barely helped. His chest convulsed with ragged breaths. Alone again, he thought bitterly. Always alone. He tried to crawl, but the wind pushed him back, flattening him against the earth. His heart thundered. For a moment panic won, then through the howl he heard it, music. Not loud, not clear, just a faint thread carried on the wind. It wasn't a melody he knew, but it was beautiful, sacred. He froze, straining to listen. The storm raged, yet the sound grew stronger, weaving through the chaos like a lifeline. Michael pressed his palms to the ground. God, is that you? The music didn't answer with words, but it didn't fade. He forced himself to stand, swaying, barely able to keep upright. He staggered toward the sound, each step a war. His body screamed for him to stop, to lie down and let the desert bury him. But he couldn't. Not now. He pushed forward, one foot dragging in front of the other. If you want me, he rasped, then take me. I can't do this anymore. The storm whipped harder, tearing at his clothes, but the music swelled. He stumbled again, crashing to his knees. His hands slammed into the dirt. He bowed his head, chest heaving, dust clogging his lungs. I surrender, his voice cracked. Do you hear me? I'm done fighting you. I'm done fighting myself. Whatever you want of me, take it. The storm roared, but in his heart something shifted. The terror loosened its grip. His panic eased into something else, an aching release. The music rose, filling him, wrapping around him like a shield. Michael pressed his forehead to the ground, tears mingling with the grit. For the first time since he was a boy, he prayed without shame. Not with eloquence, not with scripture, just raw, desperate honesty. I can't carry this alone, I can't. The wind began to die. Slowly, the rage of the storm softened into whispers. The dust thinned. Michael lifted his head, eyes red and swollen, and saw faint light breaking through. The ridge loomed ahead, closer than he realized. Grace's voice faintly called his name somewhere beyond, but he couldn't answer yet. His chest heaved with exhaustion, but his heart felt lighter. He pushed himself to his feet, trembling but alive. And though the storm had nearly destroyed him, Michael Carter knew he had crossed a line inside himself. There was no turning back. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the roar that came before. Dust settled slowly over the ridge, coating Michael's skin, his clothes, even the lashes of his eyes. He staggered forward, chest burning, lungs raw, but his heart beat with a strange steadiness. The air around him changed. It wasn't just quiet, it was still sacred, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. The heat softened, replaced by a gentle warmth that didn't scorch, but embraced. Michael stopped. His knees trembled, and then he saw him. A man stood a few steps ahead, dressed not in royal splendor but in the simplest of robes dusty from travel. His hair was dark, falling across his shoulders, his eyes deep and steady, reflecting something beyond the world Michael knew. His hands bore faint scars, not grotesque, but undeniable. Michael's breath caught, his lips parted, but no words came. The man's gaze held him, no judgment, no condemnation, just presence, unshakable, unmovable, eternal. Michael fell to his knees, his voice breaking. Why me? The man stepped closer, his sandals leaving no mark in the dust. Because you were lost. I've done terrible things, Michael whispered. His throat tightened. Things I can't take back, people I failed, lives I wasted. I don't deserve you. The man reached out, placing a hand on Michael's shoulder. The touch was firm, yet tender, and in it, Michael felt the weight of all his pain loosen. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," the man said. Michael bowed his head, tears falling freely. "I don't know how to let go." "You already have," came the reply. "Here, on this ground, when you surrendered." Michael shook his head, sobbing. "I'm afraid that if I walk back I'll fall again. That I'll ruin whatever this is." The man's hand lifted his chin gently, forcing Michael to meet his eyes. In them was no fear, no anger, only love, fierce and unyielding. "You will stumble, but you will not be alone." Michael's chest cracked open with grief and relief all at once. He reached forward and collapsed into the man's arms, weeping with a sound that came from the deepest chambers of his soul. For years he had hidden his weakness, armored himself in silence and rage. Now the armor shattered, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the broken child he had always carried inside. The man held him, no rush, no impatience, just a steady embrace, as if time itself had stopped to make room for this moment. Michael's sobs slowed, his breathing steadied. For the first time in decades, he felt safe, truly safe. When he finally pulled back, his vision blurred with tears, he asked, "What do you want from me?" The man smiled, not with triumph, not with demand, but with gentleness. "Only your heart." Michael pressed a hand against his chest. The guilt, the torment, the endless weight, it wasn't gone, but it was no longer his to bear. He felt lighter, freer. The man stepped back, his presence radiant but not blinding. Michael wanted to cling to him, to never let go, but he sensed the moment was ending. "Will I see you again?" he asked desperately. "You already do," the man answered, "in every step you take from here." And then, like the last note of a song fading into silence, he was gone. The desert remained. The ridge towered above. The world was unchanged. But Michael Carter was not the same man who had entered it. He knelt there in the dust, trembling, overwhelmed, and for the first time in years he whispered not in anger, but in reverence, "Thank you." The morning sun crept slowly over the ridge, bathing the rocks in hues of crimson and gold. Michael blinked against the light, his eyes swollen from tears but steady. He sat in silence for a long time, his knees buried in dust, his chest rising with deep, measured breaths. The presence was gone, but its weight lingered, like warmth after a fire has burned out. He touched his chest, where the hand had rested, half expecting to feel a mark, but there was none. The change wasn't on his skin, it was inside. When he finally stood, his legs shook, but they carried him. Each step felt like a choice, not a punishment. Halfway down the ridge he found a spring trickling from between the rocks. The water shimmered in the morning light, cool and clean. He knelt, cupping it in his hands. The first sip stung his cracked lips, but the second soothed. He splashed his face, letting the grit and salt wash away. Droplets clung to his beard, running down his neck. It felt like more than water. It felt like renewal. Behind him a voice called his name. "Michael!" He turned to see Grace, climbing carefully down the slope. Her clothes were dusty, her hair tangled, but relief shone in her eyes. "I thought I lost you in the storm," she said breathlessly. "You almost did," he admitted. She studied him, pausing mid-step. Something in his face made her stop. "You look different." He gave a small, almost shy smile. "I am." Grace tilted her head, skeptical but intrigued. What happened up there? Michael looked past her, toward the horizon. Words rose to his tongue, but he knew some things couldn't be explained. Not yet. Not fully. "I found what I didn't know I was searching for." Grace's eyes softened. She didn't press further. Instead, she joined him at the spring, kneeling to drink. For a while they said nothing, letting the quiet of the desert fill the spaces between them. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle. "So, what now?" Michael wiped the water from his face, his reflection rippling in the pool below. He thought of Phoenix, of the streets where he had wandered like a ghost, of the family he had abandoned, of the veterans who walked the same broken path he had. "I'm going back," he said firmly, "not to run, to rebuild." Grace studied him, her lips curving into a faint smile. "That sounds like a man with a purpose." "Maybe for the first time in a long time," he replied. The descent continued. Michael's body still ached, his blisters still burned, but each step down felt lighter than the steps that had carried him up. The ridge no longer loomed as a threat, but stood behind him as a marker, a place of transformation. At the base, he paused, glancing back one last time. The red rock blazed under the rising sun, fierce and unyielding. He whispered a quiet thank you, not expecting an answer, just needing to say it. Grace touched his arm. "Ready?" He nodded. "More than I've ever been." They started across the open desert, the road to Phoenix waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. Michael Carter, once a man running from his past, now walked toward his future with steady steps. And though the desert stretched endless before him, it no longer felt like punishment. It felt like a path he was finally willing to follow. The road back stretched long, broken by stretches of asphalt shimmering under the sun and patches of dirt where the desert reclaimed its land. Michael and Grace walked in silence for much of it, their footsteps steady, the weight of the ridge still hanging in the air. When Phoenix finally appeared on the horizon, Michael's chest tightened. The skyline glimmered with glass and steel, but to him, it looked like a graveyard of memories. Every street, every corner held shadows he had tried to escape. Yet this time, he wasn't running away. He was walking back with something new inside him. They entered the city as evening fell. Car horns blared, neon signs flickered, and people hurried past with lives that seemed worlds away from the desert's silence. The noise should have overwhelmed him. Instead, it grounded him. He wasn't lost in it anymore. Grace stopped at a bus station. "This is where I leave you," she said. "I've got to head back to Flagstaff. My group's waiting." Michael turned to her, struggling for words. "If you hadn't found me," he shook his head, "I don't think I'd be standing here." Grace smiled faintly. "Maybe you would have. Maybe someone else made sure you'd be found." He exhaled slowly. "Thank you, Grace." "You don't owe me thanks. Just keep walking the way you are now." She squeezed his arm once before stepping onto the bus. Michael stood there until it pulled away, swallowed by the city traffic. Then he turned toward the streets he had abandoned. The first stop was his sister's house. Her porch light flickered as he knocked. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in shock. "Michael." "It's me," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. For disappearing. For everything." Her hands trembled as she pulled him into a hug. "I thought you were gone for good." "So did I." They talked for hours. About Tyler. About the years they had wasted in silence. About forgiveness. Tentative but real. For the first time since his brother's death, Michael felt the possibility of family again. Days later, he found the courage to call Lena. Her voice on the line was cautious, distant. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, gripping the phone tightly. "But I need you to know I've changed. I met someone in the desert, and I met him too. I can't explain it, but I'm not the man I was." There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. "I hope that's true, Michael. For your sake." It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall, enough to let light through. Michael didn't stop there. He sought out a local church, stepping into its doors for the first time in 12 years. The hymns echoed through the sanctuary, stirring something in him. He sat in the back pew, his head bowed, tears slipping down his face. He wasn't ashamed. Not anymore. Soon after, he found Grace's organization and joined them. The first night he went out, he helped a man dehydrated and trembling on the desert's edge. As Michael handed him water, he saw himself in the stranger's hollow eyes. "You're not alone," Michael said, the same words he once thought he'd imagined. The man drank, his hands shaking, and Michael realized this was what he had been spared for. Not to live for himself, but to help others who walked the same road of shadows. Every act of service chipped away at the darkness inside him, replacing it with something brighter. Phoenix hadn't changed, but Michael had. And now, for the first time in years, he belonged. Not to the city, not to the past, but to the future he was willing to build. 3 years passed, and the desert was no longer a place of punishment for Michael Carter. It was the place of his rebirth. He had returned countless times since, not to wander in despair, but to guide others out of it. Near Tucson, he helped establish a shelter for homeless veterans. The building wasn't fancy, converted from an old warehouse, but it was alive with hope. Cots lined the walls, meals were served daily, and, most importantly, no one was turned away. Michael walked its halls every evening, greeting men who carried the same hollow eyes he once had. He listened more than he spoke, offering words when they were ready, silence when they weren't. His story traveled among them, whispered with disbelief until they saw it in his eyes, the truth of a man who had walked through the furnace and survived. One night, as the sun set over the desert and painted the sky with shades of fire, a young veteran named Daniel approached him. His hands shook, his voice low. "I don't think I can keep going, Mike. I see their faces every night. I drink just to stop it. I don't think God wants me anymore." Michael placed a hand on his shoulder, steady and firm. "I used to say the same thing. Out there in the desert, I begged for it to end, but he didn't let me go. He won't let you go either." Tears welled in Daniel's eyes. Michael didn't push further. He simply sat with him until the silence felt lighter, until the burden wasn't his alone. That was how Michael worked, not through sermons, but through presence. Just as presence had saved him. His relationship with his sister grew strong again. They shared dinners on Sundays, laughter finally returning to their conversations. Lena, though still cautious, began answering his calls more often. They weren't together, but there was peace between them, something Michael never thought possible. Every piece of his life wasn't perfect, but he no longer expected perfection. He understood now that brokenness wasn't the end, it was the soil where grace could grow. One evening, standing outside the shelter, Michael looked west toward the desert. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of mesquite and earth. He closed his eyes and remembered the moment when he thought he was finished, when the storm had broken him, and when the presence had lifted him from the dust. He whispered, "I didn't find you in a church. I found you out there when I was ready to stop running." And he smiled. The desert had taught him that redemption wasn't a single moment, it was a path, one he would walk for the rest of his life, carrying others when they couldn't carry themselves, just as he had once been carried. Michael Carter, the man who once sought death under the burning Arizona sun, was now the man who walked with God. And his journey was only beginning. If this story moved you, subscribe now for more journeys of redemption and faith. And don't stop here. Click on the next video to hear the story of the woman who forgave her father's killer.